Committee. The first item of business is the election of chair and vice chair. Do I have any nominations for the position of chair? Councillor Coleman? Councillor Chambers, do you accept? Okay. Are there any other nominations? Councillor Pierce?
Move to close.
Are there any other nominations before we close? Do I have a seconder for closing? Okay. All those in favor of closing nominations? Okay, Councillor Chambers, congratulations. I will now call for the position of vice chair of the Policy and Development Committee. Do I have any nominations? Councillor Laferriere? Okay. Do I have any other nominations at this point? Councillor? Okay. Councillor House, do you accept the nomination? Okay. Do I have a seconder for closing? Okay. All those in favor of closing nominations? Okay, I will turn the meeting over to Councillor Chambers then.
Okay, we'll get right at it. The agenda has been circulated. Are there any additions to the agenda? Steve?
I'd like to add an addition under other business. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'd like to add an addition to other business, the topic of budget or grant review.
Anything else, David?
Yeah, other business, and we'll talk about a virus going around.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
We'll talk about the virus. I have a couple questions.
Anything else? Then would someone move the adoption of the agenda as amended? Brian moves it. John Pierce seconds it. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. There is the opportunity to declare an interest at the appropriate time. Do so if you wish. There are no delegations, petitions, or presentations. The minutes have been circulated. Would someone move that the minutes from Community Services, Corporate Development, and Public Works Committee meetings be adopted? Mayor, David, second by Mark. Are there any errors or omissions to the Community Services Committee minutes? Corporate Development, yes. With regard to the Community Service Committee minutes?
Yes, I have a question, Mr. Chairman, about them. Thank you. Do we have any details yet, other than the Community Services Committee, about the Eco Festival and Earth Week? And my other question was, what is a digital advisory citizen program?
Okay, who wants to tackle that?
Your Worship, Mr. Chair, through you, I can report that there will be a report on next week's Administration Operations Committee agenda on Earth Week, our Earth Week approach. So you can look forward to that report. And in turn, I do not know the answer to the other question, but we can get further information on that. So.
Okay. Then let's move on to CDC committee minutes. Any questions or errors or omissions? And finally, the Public Works Committee. Then I'll call the question to adopt the minutes. All those in favor? Opposed? Minutes are adopted. No business arising. There are consent items listed. would anyone like anything removed from the consent items to be discussed under other business? Then would someone move that the items to be approved and the items to be received under the consent agenda be received and approved? Mark, and moved by Mark, seconded by Mayor David. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Staff, or there are no committee reports. Staff reports, natural gas expansion. There's a recommendation accompanying the report. I'm assuming everyone has read the report. Would someone move the recommendation put on the floor? David moves it, and John seconds it. Are there any questions? David.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to ask, through you to Mr. Bradley, the author of the report. Good report, learned a lot. Secondly, you said if gas pipelines are put in the ground through that provincial grant, there can be no property taxes, correct? But you didn't give a timeline on that. Is that forever?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So what the program is, it looks for a local contribution, and it's my understanding that the local contribution that has normally been offered is to waive taxes on the gas pipeline. So pipelines are assessed and they are taxed based to the owner of the pipeline. In this case, it would be Enbridge. So that's how it's normally happened. So I think I framed it that would be likely the contribution, the logical contribution that we could make locally. And it's my understanding that it has been for a 10 to 20 year period, depending on the municipalities. It's at the discretion of the municipality, but obviously if we were to get funding through this program, and the municipality was serious about trying to lock funding down through the gas utility, they would offer what you could. So that would be if Enbridge was successful in one of these applications, then they would be working with me, and I would likely bring a further report back to committee seeking the approval to waive those taxes and to how to then fund that waiver. So,
Thank you, Michael.
Joan, and then Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to the CAO, did they give any reasons why they wouldn't accept Onondaga?
through you, Mr. Chair. No, they didn't. I had some dialogue with Union Gas representatives. They looked at their existing gas network and the existing population and the number of houses and the geography, and they said they thought that the only two projects that would qualify for this program would be Glen Morris and Harley. They didn't really get into, because I think there's some other communities as well. So I'd have to, they're the applicants, so obviously they have to be confident in making the application. So I could certainly go back to them and ask them if there was other communities you had interest in, but and these are the ones that they said to me, we think these would be our best chances.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll maybe check with them in the future and see what the chances are of them ever getting gas down there when it's right next door. Thank you.
Mark?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Michael. It's my understanding, though, that we don't set the pipeline rate anyway, and we can't change it. So that seems to me like a very decent contribution for us, because they're sort of undertaxed anyway, and it's not much revenue. I guess that's more comment than a question. You nodded. I just also want to say thanks for, through you, Mr. Chair, for the new format of the reports. I noticed the triple bottom line, the financial, social, and environmental pieces in there, and I think it's really helpful, and I think it's going to be helpful for the community more broadly, too, to understand the impact of our policies.
Good point. Okay, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That motion is carried. 10B, with regard to the street naming opportunities, the report is there. There's a bit of a modification on the addendum in the red. Would someone move that recommendation? Brian moves it, seconds Mayor David. Any questions with regard to that? John and then Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you. I'm just wondering, it says in the report that developers bring forward their requests for street names at various times throughout the draft plan approval process. Can I get clarification? Would the street names be there prior to a lot going for sale? If somebody's buying a lot, do they understand what street they're buying the lot on?
Oh, there you are.
Through you, Chair to Council. Quick answer is yes. Council usually sees the name of the roads in the subdivision agreement that comes before council. It's in the actual maps. Now with delegated authority, council most likely won't see that, but yes, it is done before the registration.
Okay, so just to follow up, Mr. Chair, so I just want to be very clear on this. So if I'm somebody in the public and I go to an open house, let's say for a new survey that's coming in, a new subdivision that's coming in, at that point in time when they say there's this house, there's that house, I would know the names of the streets in that subdivision.
That depends when you're talking about that open house. If it's through the planning process before draft plan approval, then the answer is no. If it's after that and during the subdivision agreement, past registration, then it's yes.
Okay, thank you.
I think Steve had a question.
Actually, it's a comment rather than a question, Mr. Chair, is that all right?
Sure.
In reading through this on the weekend, I was looking at the Rowley requests, and I contacted Nancy Rowley, and for clarification, she's not looking for 2 Rowley streets. And it kind of read that way as a possibility, the way she had written her letter, and she clarified to me that she is looking for 1 street name, preferably James E. Rowley, whatever, or J.E. Rowley, just 1 street. She did have a question, which I guess now I do have a question, is as he was a veteran, if we end up naming a street for him, and I hope we do, does he get a poppy on the street if he was a veteran or only if he was killed in the war? Do we know?
That is a good question. I can find the answer out for that and let you know.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Recommendation is adopted. Moving on to the next report, and that's with regard to the site alteration bylaw. Basically to be received and further work to be brought back. Would someone move that? Feel comfortable moving that? Steve and John? Are there any questions or comments? David?
Since we brought this in 2018, we've got a list here of how many people applied for a permit. And I'm wondering how well followed is this bylaw? And how many people had to be coaxed into maybe applying for a permit? And has it prevented, has it helped us in what we've wanted it to do? In other words, are we keeping the bad stuff out? Are we preventing changes in water flow and all that stuff? I'm curious, is it working?
Who wants to answer that? Would Lori like to come forward and perhaps assist in maybe helping David out?
Hi, through the chair to the councillor. Yes, I think so far the bylaw's been very successful. We've had some applications that have come forth that we have actually denied just because they didn't have the proper documents with them. And several, as you can see on the list, several people have applied and been able to obtain permits.
Any other questions or comments? Joan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And through you to Lori. We had one recently that project was started before the actual bylaw was actually implemented or approved by council. Has that issue been all solved? And it was a pond, I believe.
Oh, yes. Through the chair to the councillor, you're talking about the application where the gentleman wanted to fill in the pond on his property?
Yes.
Yeah, so that, you're right, that one was, the project was started before permit was received. We're currently working with that property owner for him to get the proper permits.
Thank you. So it's in the works still. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? I just have a couple comments to assist. One, in my opinion, one of the groups that you want to consult with should be the conservation authorities as well, because they have a similar process. And one of the issues that needs to be looked at is the duplication between what we do and what the conservation authorities do on the same permit, because sometimes people have to apply in both places and it causes confusion and there's expenses, et cetera. And the other issue that has been brought to my attention has been the fee structure, which can be very onerous in some situations, and you don't want it to be so onerous that they will not come forward to apply for a permit, thinking it's going to cost them a lot, and they'll try to do it under the table, that kind of stuff, so it has to be reasonable. And the other is the grandfathering that Joan had mentioned with regard to the ongoing fill. Any other comments or suggestions? And that's an open book. You can contact the staff with any concerns or questions or comments to assist. And the report says that's coming back in June, approximately. Okay, then I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. And that takes us to the next part of the agenda, which is the Chief Administrative Officer's update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to make a few comments. This is our first meeting of this new committee cycle. We have gotten rid of the general manager's report, which was included in the report they received, but I am going to maintain a CAO's update for just what I think organizational matters or matters that are evolving that I think council might be interested in. So I wanted to just make a couple of notes this evening, and Councillor LaFerrier already noted my report on natural gas had a bit of a new format, and it's the format that we're going to bring forward. And it includes reporting on what we're calling the triple bottom line, which is the environmental, social, and economic impact of any decision that's council's making. It's a high level, but we want to just it helps us to remind ourselves from a corporate social responsibility perspective that we are understanding the impacts of our decisions and helping council to understand those as well. As well, we're going to commit to providing an executive summary to every report, and otherwise the report format is pretty much the same. So. And then I think this is probably going to answer Councillor Miller's other business, but I just wanted to update you on pandemic planning here at the municipality, because I think this is a topic that's fairly getting quite a bit of press right now. So I will just give you a short update of what we're doing at the staff level here. You may see some further reports coming forward, but at this point I don't see any council decisions regarding this. So internally, we are updating our pandemic response plans. We have a set of pandemic plans. They date back to 2009. Some are updated in 2013. Our focus on those plans is business continuity in the event that a pandemic did start to impact our ability to deliver the municipality's operations. And so they basically just help us make some staff level decisions on how we're going to continue to run the services and what services may not be able to delivered. Our immediate focus on those plans was our emergency services, with a primary focus on paramedic service, because it's the only frontline medical service that we provide. And so obviously it's probably the most important service that we have to make sure that we can maintain and continue. And it's the service that's most heavily involved in what I would call broader pandemic planning. And the remaining departments, we've completed most of the plans. We have our master corporate plan updated as well. So we have, I think, a good corporate response, internal corporate response to this. It's a standing item on our senior management team agendas, and I'll continue to update council on this matter. Yesterday, I joined a conference call along with my colleague at the city, with the Chief Medical Officer of Health and the CEO of the Brant Community Healthcare System, to talk about the role of our emergency operations centers in the event that we move into a full-scale pandemic. We provided clarity to those two organizations on how our systems work, noting that we have a shared emergency management coordinator, so our systems are basically running the same way. So that's a very good thing, because the three services that would be most heavily involved in a pandemic are shared services, these being the health unit, paramedic services, and social services. So it's good that we have this cross-training, and the city CAO and I, along with our two community emergency management coordinators, are going to meet later this week to further discuss the potential of maybe, if we did move into a pandemic situation, about running a single emergency operations center, which we see a lot of upside to. But we're going to have that discussion, and we may be talking to council about that a little later. So we also just, we learned a little bit about what those organizations are doing. We had a good conversation. We're going to have a follow-up conversation later this Friday, and I think that's probably going to become a weekly conversation for us for the time being. And so we also will be releasing a website portal, I think probably, if not today, then tomorrow, on our website. Its primary purpose is just going to be to link citizens to either the health unit, the Ministry of Health, or the local hospital. We don't want to be providing information on a subject we don't know anything about, but we want to make sure that our citizens know where to go for that information. And if they come to us, we want to get them into the right direction. We'll also be mentioning on that we're updating our internal business continuity plan. So we have considered the fact that we may start to struggle to deliver municipal services in the event, the hopefully unlikely event that a pandemic did become a problem here in our area. So. And then finally, just I think it's worth mentioning that our paramedic service, which is a frontline service in the healthcare system, they are very actively involved with several agencies right now in planning for pandemics. And so outside of that, I think internally we are on this. We've been on it for about a month and a half right now. And I'll continue to bring information forward to council as they require it. But I think we're taking the proactive steps that you should expect us to be taking in this situation, given where we are in this situation, which thankfully right now seems to be fairly minor in our country. So,
David, did you have anything further that you'd like to?
Yeah, well, if you want me to bring it forward, absolutely. Through you, thank you, Michael. It's a fluid situation. And I guess in Italy, I'm a little concerned because the ambulances went from 8 minutes to respond to over an hour to respond, and that's the way it goes. So at the end of the day, all I was going to ask was if maybe our first responders could include a little blurb next week about how they're handling. And I did have a question from one of our firefighters saying, well, they've not heard any, you know what I mean? Like, they've not heard anything or were given any direction, and maybe that's the way it's to be, but it would be nice, I think, if they had some kind of an update. Because you don't want people to panic, but you do want people to be prepared, and I think as a municipality, we should be prepared. And I understand it's fluid. I mean, things could change any second. I'm really worried OSUM's going to be canceled, but we'll worry about that later. So, yeah, if we could maybe get at our operations meeting next week, maybe some kind of a blurb from each of the managers about how they're responding.
well, so through you, Mr. Chair, well, it would be my preference that they're going to say exactly what I just said.
You did? Okay.
We are updating our departmental pandemic response plans. They're focused on business continuity. Now, I'm not sure when you spoke to that firefighter, but we did late last week release some internal messaging through our intranet system to all staff.
That was on the weekend.
And so if he hadn't seen that, if the firefighter hadn't seen that, I will speak to the fire chief to make sure that it did get out, but I know they do use the internet system fairly widely. So we have released internal messaging basically on what we're up to, and that we are working primarily, our focus here is on business continuity, because that's really, that's our role at this point, so.
Okay, and just so you know, I did ask Mr. Potchuff back in January if you guys had done any pandemic preparation or training. He said not on paper only, but it's going to be a good learning experience, if nothing else.
And through you, Mr. Chair, we've ramped up quite a bit in February, and we did have a senior management team meeting along with key emergency management stakeholders on the topic. I think it was mid-February. So yep. So we are ramping up, and really through you, Mr. Chair, under the guidance of the Brant County Health Units.
Mark?
Just a reminder on this, more broadly, so I sit on the chamber as the council rep for the Brantford Chamber of Commerce. And they're also on the business continuity piece. They're also helping local businesses, giving them resources to help them plan for a pandemic themselves and to reduce. So it's just another resource. If you're talking to any businesses in your ward or in the county more broadly, they can get in touch with David Prang at the chamber and get some resources to help them individually plan, because we can only do so much as a county, and we have the shared community healthcare and health unit, I should say. But it's going to take everybody. So I know school boards are doing it. If the business community does it, and the governments do it, and the first responders do it, we stand a lot better chance.
Joan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When we hired a emergency management coordinator jointly with the city of Brantford, and everybody knows his name, so I'm not going to say his name, but I'm wondering, the fire chief is the first EM, emergency management coordinator, at the top of the list, correct? And then is the person that we hired jointly with the city second on the list? The reason I'm asking is I got a booklet last week from the GRCA, and I was concerned about the way the contacts were listed. That joint emergency management coordinator was only, had contact information listed under the city of Brantford and not the county of Brant in the booklet. And it was a flood management booklet for emergencies. It wasn't for what we're talking about, but I'm just seeking clarification. Who's in charge and then who's next and so on. Thank you.
Can you respond to that?
I think I can respond. So it's just worth noting, there's a lot of different levels of responsibility. So the Community Emergency Management Coordinator is our fire chief here at the county, and the Deputy Fire Chief is the backup Community Emergency Management Coordinator. I am the Chief of the Emergency Operations Center. They're different roles. So the CEMC, Community Management Coordinator, his or her role is to ensure that an emergency plan is in place and to provide, to make their submissions to Emergency Management Ontario to ensure we have compliance. It's my understanding, and I could be corrected, that at the city, the Community Emergency Management Coordinator is the Deputy Fire Chief, and then Mr. Potroff, the Emergency Management Coordinator, is their backup. So that's why he would be on their list and not our list, because they've chosen to do that. I think because they've had some staffing changes. So that was their choice that they've made. We didn't make that choice. So that, again, that's how they've chosen to organize their CEMC and backup CEMC. We've chosen a different way.
Different backup than we don't have a joint, even though we're
Just-
paying for that person.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. So it's just important to remember that the CEMC is just a designated role. It doesn't have a ton of responsibility attached to it other than to make sure that emergency plans are being developed. And so our approach is historic, to have the chief and the deputy chief serve as the CEMC and the backup. The cities decided to have their deputy as their primary CEMC, and then the emergency management coordinator, which is it's a different role. So just to further clarify this messy situation, the emergency management, Mr. Potroff, is a shared resource between the city and the county. We pay for half of his wage, and the city pays for half of his wage. And his job is to do all the background work, to write the plans, to help us to develop our training programs, et cetera, et cetera. He does that for both municipalities, but they've also, I think, just appointed him as their backup CEMC. Again, it's an established role. It's in legislation. It doesn't have a ton of responsibility to it, but that person is charged to make sure that the municipality is compliant with emergency management.
I guess I'll conclude.
Thank you for clarifying that.
I'll conclude the discussion, and then you can go on to the next part by saying the Board of Health is meeting next Wednesday, and they have set up a health a website, and there'll be clarifications further at that time. I guess it's important to understand that communication is probably a key responsibility, because if someone out there on the 10th concession is starting to sneeze and not feel well, what do they do, and who do they talk to, and where do we go from there? So that's what is going to happen probably, and it's important that we have the communication and the network in place to make sure everybody feels confident in what's happening. So, anything else? Did that answer your questions on?
Yeah,
on-
no,
on
that's
the-
good. Thank you very much.
Okay. Then, if that concludes the CAO's update, we'll move on through the communications and matters referred, which there aren't any, and go right to other business. And Steve, you're on deck with the grant process.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I believe that with the very best of intentions, we've taken what was a 3-hour meeting process plus background reading and turned it into a very large undertaking. So I'm moving that we use this process for our own individual background research, but we revert back to the process that we've used in the past. And if there's a seconder, we could discuss it further.
Okay, I'm just going to, I'm not sure that that motion is in order right at this point because there's a process underway that was adopted by council. And I don't think we can supersede that at this committee. We can recommend to council that they review their process, but we can't change direction of council at the committee, and I stand corrected on that. But that having been said, if you'll just kind of park the motion for a minute, we can ask the CAO, and I think your concerns are not yours alone. I think everyone has the same concerns, and I think everyone knows where you want to go with this, and that's to modify the process that we have entered into. And I believe there's an opportunity to do that when we meet as the grant selection committee. I forget when that meeting is. It's the 30th. Now you're suggesting you're maybe hitting the I'll call it the panic button at this stage because you want to change things before we get to that meeting.
Respond. Just because we all have a task deadline of the 19th, and if we're going to change the process, we need to do it now, and it won't work to wait until council meets or until the actual budget meeting itself. Thank you.
Then let me refer this concern, I'll call it at this point, that I think everyone is universally having to the CAO to guide us how to move forward with this process so that we're not in violation of a council direction and that we want to take advantage of the time that is between now and then.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Write this down because
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I believe that the process that we have a council meeting scheduled, a special meeting of council, I guess, or it's an ad hoc committee, which is council to allocate grants, and then a special meeting of council immediately afterwards. So that's really that's really council's target. And then council committee approved some approaches. The committee approved a application form that went out and has been returned by potential applicants. And then you also approved an allocation criteria. And there was an expectation that councilors would provide feedback into that criteria to staff so that we could populate a master list to go into that meeting. So I think that the chair is right. Council's made that decision. If I could, and maybe I'd look towards the chair and the clerk on this, is maybe if council was of consensus that the current process was not working very well, then councilors would continue to do what they had normally done, which is read the grant applications that have been circulated and go into that meeting, and at the front of that meeting then consent on or determine how you wanted that meeting to go forward, I think. So it would just be in my opinion, a correct me if I'm wrong, consensus that people were not going to continue, the councilors were not going to continue to use the process that staff have put out. We won't expect feedback to come in and populate that list, and then council would make a decision at that March 30th meeting on how you want to proceed. noting that all of you would have done the background research on the grant applications, and at that time, we could proceed as we have in the past, or we could use another methodology that we could work out that evening, so. Does that sound?
Before I ask, if everyone agrees to that, I've got a couple maybe additions. Did you have anything, Steve, that you'd want to?
I guess process-wise, I'm trying to figure out if we need a motion and a seconder in order to really discuss this.
No, we're discussing it right now in our other business.
Okay, all right, that's fine. Then I think my point is made. And I think just the evaluation of the research has merit. I believe that for 11 individual people to be evaluating whether it's a charity or a nonprofit, whether has a board of directors, whether they've provided financial statements, I'm not sure that's the best use of our time. I think we're going to end up in the same debate mode at the end where we're all kind of voicing our comments. So I'm not sure that spending the time populating the 57 applications in all the different categories by the 19th of March, whether that's time well spent.
And we'll have a resolution perhaps to suspend the process until further clarification.
Thank you.
As soon as I get, there's a couple other people want to speak to it, and one is John Pierce.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, through you, and I think, yeah, ooh, major feedback. Yeah, so I think we're all in agreement. I believe that something like this, massaged a little bit better, might be where we end up going, but I'm just wondering, like, would it be in order, or can we do it? I'm not sure how much time has to be, but is it possible? Could the mayor call a special meeting after this meeting in order to make that motion that we don't proceed with it? Or I'm not sure. Or is it good enough just that, sorry folks, good enough this that we have consensus that, hey, we're going to do this way?
I think this is all going to work out to everyone's satisfaction. Again, we'll get the CEO to respond to that, but first I have Joan and then Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and yes, I had a few questions, and as an example, I was given information about item number 17 on the list, and the information wasn't available when the grant application was put in, but it is available now before we have to finish scoring. And I thought, how do we get that information out to the members of this council so they can consider everything and they're making their scoring? And there didn't seem to be a way to do that. I asked staff. So I'm wondering if additional information comes forward, would we want to hear from the applicant through an email so that you have that information if it's very important? Or how are we going to handle that? Are we going to wait to the last minute at the grant meeting and have me tell you then?
I think that exemplifies some of the concerns people are having with the process. So if we are looking at the process, obviously there's difficulties being experienced. First I have Mark, and then I'll go back to John.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I agree with John that the process just needs some massaging. However, I'd like to remind this astute table that we did have several options that were different than this one presented to us, and one of them was to have staff do the initial ranking, basically the thing all 11 of us are doing now, to have staff do, and then we could come in, discuss, tweak, and we turned that down because we want to control, and I'm summarizing the conversation, but I think maybe looking at that again might be helpful, because we can get there, and if things are ranked and we don't agree with the ranking, well, we still have the insight, and we'll have the ability and knowledge to talk about things that might not be in the report, or we might get, to Joan's point, at another time, a little later in the process. So I really think, we could maybe just look back at that initial staff report, and maybe we didn't fully understand the scope of some of this and the administrative burden.
John, did you want to finish the,
Yeah, if I could, Mr. Chair, through you, just for clarification with Councillor Gatwood there. With the grant process, was there not a cutoff date for applications to be in? If that's the case, then, you know, my apologies to whomever of the 57 didn't get their information in by that point in time. That, again, it just goes back to what we've been going on year after year after year, incomplete applications, right? So just my own opinion, but my opinion is we go with the information we have at the close of the application submission timeframe.
okay, I'm going to try and wrap this up into a process, and you can see if you agree with me or not. There's a deadline of March 19th that we're supposed to have this stuff in. Obviously, that's not going to happen, so that will be suspended. Then we'll have a council meeting we'll have a regular council meeting prior to the grants committee meeting that was scheduled.
Yes.
At that council meeting, perhaps that can be an agenda item to resolve this process. And all we have to do is basically suspend the deadline of the 19th, that everything in. If everyone is in agreement to that, then hang on to your submissions and don't pass them in, and we'll try and resolve this on the council meeting of whatever day it is, the 20th or something, 24th. And then the CAO can craft a magic carpet to ride through this process in a reasonable way. But obviously, I think it's unanimous, at least the majority of people are having difficulty with the process, and we want to kind of suspend it at this point so we make sure we do it right. Is that a way forward? And we don't have to have a resolution, we'll just suspend the 19th and ask that it be placed on the agenda on the 24th. John and then Joan.
So in other words, then, Mr. Chair, I've completed my binder. Don't bother turning it in before the 19th, just sit on it.
That's what I think I'm hearing, or if it's turned in, then it's not going to be acted on until we straighten the process out at the council meeting. Got that, Joan?
And my question or comment is that I thought, okay, I've got all these lists of applications. If I come across one that I don't want to give any money to, I'm just putting not applicable and not scoring it. Is that,
I think you can do whatever you want to do individually, but we will go through the process and try and resolve a path forward on the 24th. Okay, and the mayor's going to be the one to guide us through that discussion. Go ahead, David.
Well, I just think this is a very good time to mention the value in the work that the Brant Community Foundation does, because this is exactly what they do all day long, and it is a tough process, and they do a lot of good work. So when we brought the idea of the Brant Community Foundation doing this for us, we thought it was a lot of money, and it's a lot of money because it's a lot of work.
Okay, that concludes the other business as I have it. Is there any other business to come before the committee before we move in camera? Joan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one quick question. Excuse me. One quick question, if I might. And that is, the information that we received from Watson's, our economist, that's on the agenda under 8AI. After I read that report, I wrote down a question, and I bet you the CAO knows the answer. Who determines what the market value of the land is the day before the building permit is issued? Because that's what our DCs are now being based on.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just to clarify, I don't believe that our current DCs are based on that. This is the new model for the
Yes.
community benefits charge. And
That's right.
I don't know the question to that. This is all new, unless Pam has more information on this, but I think, I'm not aware of this as it evolves.
Yeah,
so.
it is the new information, that's why.
Through the chair to Counselor, in most municipalities, it is through an appraiser.
Sorry?
Through an appraiser that gives that value.
So are you saying we would have to hire an appraiser?
It
And not
depends how,
use MPAC?
it would depend how we roll out this process, and those are all discussions that we're still having.
Thank you.
Okay, we've essentially concluded the business portion of the meeting before we go in camera. This is the first meeting of the Policy Development and Strategic Direction Committee report. I'm just going to, John and I had a discussion with Michael just prior to the meeting beginning. There may still be some confusion about what happens at this committee as opposed to what happens at next week's committee, and what's going to be on this agenda as opposed to what's going to be on the next agenda. We're kind of a work in progress. Michael had a good way to explain that. I'm just going to ask him to try to distinguish between what we want to talk about at this committee as opposed to what we want to talk about at the next committee before going in camera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so how I framed it and how I've been framing it to staff as we have reports come forward to try to figure out which committee they're going to is that the committee next week is Administration and Operations, and I'm calling that business as usual. This will be quite a number of tenders that you'll be awarding and other, so I mentioned there's a report on Earth Day, Earth Week events. And so these are fairly normal business. We would assume that they're not going to have significant debate. And the consent agenda on that agenda will be quite large. We consider this committee to be business as unusual. So these are things that we don't normally do. These are things like such as this evening there was a report on natural gas extension. It's not a normal business item for us. It was a learning curve for staff, and it's a learning curve for council. There were some good questions about it, and it's information that council now has on a program area that's not usual. So that's how we are approaching this committee. It'll be a smaller agenda with fewer items on it, but we would assume that these items would have more discussion and debate. In next week's committee, we would see more items. It will be a busy committee, but we would assume that there won't be as much debate and discussion on them because they are business as usual. They're consistent with their decisions that will be consistent and in accordance with county-approved policies and practices. Hopefully that helps.
Are there any questions or comments from the committee members about the committee itself before we move in camera? Joan?
Thank you. The Public Works and Community Services minutes then should be on next week's meeting normally? Not this?
Those will be the last minutes of those committees because they are no longer committees. And it was put on this agenda, I suppose, just to wrap that up.
And
We
they
don't
were-
have a Public Works Committee anymore, nor do we have a Community Service Committee
And they were
anymore.
probably dealt with at February council meeting too. But I just, thank you. Done now. Yeah. I'm done.
Go ahead, John.
But
Thanks.
just for clarification, we could potentially have items that would have been discussed at Public Works or Community Service or CDC on any of the committees now. So it potentially could be spread out across all three.
This committee may be a basket for things that business as unusual. So if you have a topic that you wish to discuss or put forward to committee, talk to the clerk and she'll figure out which and where and how and when it's going to be adopted or discussed. Now, that having been said, we're about to move in camera, so I need a motion to go in camera. Moved by Brian, seconded by Mark. All those in favor? And what I'm going to do is, since my voice is failing a little bit, I'm going to ask the vice chairman to chair the in-camera session and take us to the end of the meeting.